Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Affleck, and today we're going to be talking about expected value. One of the big three, I think, the big three being equity, expected value, and equity realization. So it kind of goes in order like equity, which is all in pre-flop, and then equity realization being how much equity do you realize playing post-flop, and that leads to how much equity you realize leads to expected value. Those are kind of the big three I like to think of. So in poker, understanding it's a very long-term game. We're playing a game with small edges, hopefully playing with a lot of volume, and there's a lot of short-term noise in poker. So we all know, kings beat aces 18% of the time. And the better you can understand that and focus on the long term is how you make a lot of money in poker. So, knowing what you can control. You control your strategy. You control what decisions you make. You do not control the runouts. You do not control your decisions your opponents make. You do control the reactions to your opponent's decisions. How often do you call, fold, or raise against those decisions? But understanding how you control what you can control and focusing on that long-term outlook in poker is what's important in generating the most amount of EV possible. Generating EV, that's what this game is all about. How do you generate that? How do you win a lot of EV? Well, you find a game you can beat, you play it a lot, and keep a proper bankroll. And keeping a proper bankroll is can't be overstated because of that long-term outlook we're looking at. We want to be able to ignore the short-term noise, and being over bankrolled, being comfortably bankrolled allows you to avoid that short-term noise much better. So expected value is the long-term result of all the decisions in a poker hand. So it's kind of like it just adds up over time. Every decision you make, you might make a penny, a couple pennies. You make whatever EV you make, and then at the end, it's kind of how much money you make over the long run. So EV cuts through that variance just to show how profitable your decisions are. So let's say here you get in $100 with aces against pocket kings. You're going to return $146 for every $100 you put in. 82% of the time, you're going to win that $200, and 18% of the time, you're going to lose $100, which nets $146. Now, $46 of that is profit because you have to invest 100, and that's a pretty good return for $46, or $46 on 100. But it's not really how poker works because poker isn't built on these huge spots. It's built up of really winning at a lot of small spots over and over again. So let's take a look at that. And we're going to start off here with a real life example just to generate this point. And poker is a little bit about like being in a game of blackjack. And there's winners and losers. The winners are the dealers, and the losers are the players. And the winners are making a ton of money because not because they're winning massive amounts in one hand, with aces versus kings, they're winning very small amounts. And blackjack, I don't know exactly what's the edge, 1%, 2% for the house. They're making that 1%, 2% over and over and over and over and over again. Very long run outlook. And that's how you want to think about poker. You want to be the dealer. You don't want to be the player that's just losing and bleeding money over the long run. So let's translate that back to poker here for a very common example. We're in the cutoff. Well, your opponent's in the cutoff for 10 big blinds, and they go all in with this range on the right. They're going to have all the pairs, broadways, suited aces, all sorts of hands on the bottom right. They go all in for 10 big blinds, and you're in the big blind. And we can look at some of these hands and how often they win and what the EV of calling the 10 big blind all in is. Now remember, you're already in for one big blind. So you're getting pot odds. You're getting laid a price because you only have to call 9. You don't have to call 10. So with ace deuce off, you're going to win 43.5% of the time against this range. Sometimes they're going to have 6-5 suited and you're a favorite. Sometimes they're going to have ace king and you're a big dog. But over the long run, you're going to make about 0.35 big blinds of profit. So with ace deuce, you're making about 0.35. King 6 suited, wins a little bit less. You're going to make 0.09 big blinds of profit. And queen 9 suited, you're going to make 0.22 big blinds per profit. So it all, it's just a math off. There's the total pot's 21.5, and you're just going to win the pot varying amounts of times. Notice you're not winning the pot over 50% of the time, and you don't have to win the pot more than 50% of the time because you're getting laid a price. That's the important part. So let's put these numbers into perspective though. 0.35 big blinds, 0.09 big blinds. These seems like, ooh, these are very marginal edges. You should just pass on these. This isn't worth it. Well, in poker, like, let's just look at myself for example. I play online poker, and um, in the games I'm playing, I'm trying to win, 5 to 7 big blinds per 100 hands. So in poker a lot, we translate everything to a win rate of big blinds per 100 hands. How many big blinds do you win per 100 hands? Here, Ace 2 Soft wins 0.35 big blinds in one hand. That is 35 big blinds per 100 hands. I'm trying to win 5 to 7. King 6 suited is winning 9 big blinds per 100 hands. Queen 9 suited, 22 big blinds per 100 hands. And so hopefully this emphasizes this idea of small profit, long term, high volume. That's what poker is all about. So other ways to think about EV, I explained earlier kind of the relationship between equity realization, and how that leads to EV. And equity alone doesn't include any betting actions. So equity is just all in pre-flop. Every hand gets to see the river and turn their cards over in every hand. Problem is, EV, or equity realization in this case, considers betting, checking, folding, and your ability to realize your equity. So in position, you're going to over realize your equity. You're going to be able to call bluffs better. You're going to be able to value bet more effectively. You're going to be able to bluff your opponent effectively. You get to call in position and see turns and rivers with your draws. Out of position, you're going to under realize your equity. You can't value bet as effectively. You can't bluff as effectively. You have to overfold a little bit because of that positional advantage. All these things work against you, and you under realize your equity. So what does this all mean? Let's look at a practical example here. So let's say the button raises to 2.3 big blinds with a stack of 30 big blinds. You also have 30 big blinds in the big blind, and you have 7 deuce offsuit. So you have to call 1.3 big blinds to win a total pot of 6.1. So 6.1 is from 2.3 from the button, 2.3 from you, and 1.5. So that equals 6.1. So you need about 21% equity in order to make this call. Now, if you look on the right, I ran an equity calculator like Equilab, 7 deuce off versus a range of about 45% of hands. I just took the top 45%, common button range, and 7 deuce off has about 30% equity versus that range. So it's going to win the pot 30% of the time. We only need to call 21%. We only need 21% equity. So I want you to pause this video, and I want you to talk out loud and express why we cannot call with 7 deuce offsuit in this spot. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you gave yourself an answer. So if you're wrong, you can understand why. We cannot call a 7 deuce offsuit in the big blind, even though we're getting the proper amount of pot odds for our equity, because of equity realization, and we're not going to realize all 30% of our equity, and that's going to lead to a negative EV action. Like, calling is losing money in this spot. It's a negative EV call with 7 deuce, because let's take this example. You call, the flop comes ace 9 deuce. They bet small, you call, the turn is a king. Now the pot's pretty big, it's like 10 big blinds, and they bet 6 big blinds. It's ace 9 deuce, turn king, and you fold your 7 deuce, and they turn over queen jack. They bluffed you. So you have like 80% equity with 7 deuce there on the turn, and you folded. This is why you are going to under realize equity in these spots with this type of a hand, because you're going to fold the best hand sometimes. You're going to fold even, like, let's say they bet 1 big blind on the flop, and the flop is, whatever, king 10 3, and they have 8 9. Like, you have 2 live cards. You're getting the right price to call, but you're going to fold because you have 7 high, and they might have a pair of kings or a pair of 10s. Right? You're going to make incorrect folds later on in the hand, and this is why you're going to under realize your equity. Now, in position, that same example of like 9 8 there, they bet on king 10 3, and you fold 7 deuce. you're denying equity there, and you're over realizing your equity. You're over realizing your EV with 9.8 there. You won 100% of the pot when you're not supposed to. So these are all kind of how EV, how equity realization, how equity work in the long run. So let's change the question though now and say, what if the big blind was all in for 2.3 big blinds instead of being 30 big blinds? What would you do now with 7 deuce? Now you call with 7 deuce offsuit, and this is pretty obvious to people because you're getting such great pot odds and you get to realize all of your equity. There's no folding. You can't fold when you're all in. It's against the rules. So you're going to win this pot now enough to justify your calling with 7 deuce. So there's lots of different ways we could be just talking about EV, and one example I love to use is the nut advantage. So we've all heard these terms of nut advantage or range advantage and how that leads to our betting. So nut advantage is really important to the EV of a range. It's especially important the deeper stacked you get. So, and we'll explain why. So when one player can have the nuts, the other player cannot. That's so when one player can have the nuts and the other player cannot have the nuts, that's where the nut advantage comes into play. And the reason why it's large stack sizes are very important for the nut advantage is because of very, very large bets. Nut advantages allow you to use very large bets. And this is something I don't think people do a good job of. And large bets, why are large bets important? One, they maximize value for the nuts. So when you have the nuts or the effective nuts, you want to win as much money as possible. Not that rocket science. But also what people don't think about is it maximizes fold equity for your bluffs. So when you're bluffing, when you bet very big, they're going to fold a lot because they're getting less pot odds. Well, that's great for you when you have a bluff because they're going to fold a lot and you're going to over realize your equity when you're bluffs. You're going to over realize and generate more EV with your bluffs than you're supposed to because of this nut advantage. So this nut advantage brings up the EV of your very bad hands. Now, a common argument will be, well, when I bet really big, they're not going to call. Well, it's not exactly the case because, well, first off, let's think of this. If they never call, that's great because you just win all the money when you bluff. You just win 100% of the bluff. So you're going to win less money with your nutted hands, but you're going to win more money with your bluffs. But they are going to call sometimes because they're getting pot odds. And this next slide is going to talk about why these big bets are so valuable. So suppose you have the nuts on the river and you can bet $500 and you get called 20% of the time, $300 and you get called 30% of the time, and $100 and you get called 80% of the time. And you can see the EV of each bet. So the $500, the EV is $100 because you get called 20% of the time. The $300 bet, the EV is $90, and the $100 is $80. So clearly, the largest bet size is the highest EV strategy, even though you get called the least amount. And it's important that you recognize this. This is like one of the biggest things that separates like small winning players from really big winning players is these bet sizing and maximizing value. And even though you only get called, the $100 bet gets called 4 times as often. So like people bet the $100 because they get that positive reinforcement so much more, but it's not the highest EV bet. And I could say you get called with the $100 bet 99% of the time, and it's still not the highest EV bet. So, and then you can change around. Like, what if you had a read and they call these medium-sized bets more often? Like, let's say you call the $300 bet 40% of the time. Well, now that bet is worth $120, and so that's the highest EV bet now. In general, with nut advantages, large bets are going to tend to be the most effective bet size because they allow you to bluff a lot and they bring up the EV of all those bluffs because you have the nuts and your opponent can't. So you can start to leverage that. And the reason why that's important at deeper stacks because this is no limit hold'em. So the deeper you are, the bigger you can bet. The shallower you are, well, now it's kind of capped how big you can bet. So the EV goes down. So having the nut advantage isn't as important, and now having the range advantage is more important. That's a topic for another video. But all these different things to talk about all contribute to EV, and over the long run, they all add up in the long run to different amounts of expected value and profit. So you really want to, how to generate more EV in poker is you want to use your advantages. When you have the nut advantage or the range advantages, those allow you to put more money into the pot. Those advantages bring up the EV of the worst hands in your range. So, for example, you can start bluffing with some really weak hands when you have really strong hands. If you don't have really strong hands, it becomes tougher to bluff with these really weak hands. So all these advantages help generate more EV with weaker parts of your range, and that's why we get to play wide ranges in position. Part of it is because we get to have these really strong hands to balance out our range and generate EV in a lot of different ways. Again, just to reiterate, poker's a long run game. You're going to win sometimes, you're going to lose sometimes, and you really just want to ignore the noise and ignore these short term swings and really focus on the long term and EV generation. And you want to find a game you can beat, doesn't and just generate as much EV as you can in that game. Play it a lot. Put in massive value. Be the blackjack dealer. And keep a proper bankroll. Like the casino doesn't care if you win 10 hands in a row of blackjack because they have this massive bankroll. And they're fine with that. And they have limits, like, maybe you can bet 10,000 is the maximum hand. Like they have limits of what they're comfortable allowing you to bet. They're managing their bankroll to put the odds in their favor. And yeah, start thinking about yourself as the blackjack dealer and generate as much EV as possible. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, subscribe to this video, and stay tuned for more.